Hello, and welcome to another fully live Friday episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Cody Kinsey. I'm a security researcher at Varonis, and today, per usual, we have my good friend and fellow hacker Alex here to go over the hacking news. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course.
So I also like to go over some great tools that we've found over the week, and if you have any questions live in the chat, we'll also try to answer them, especially if they're related to the news or if you have any commentary on that. And it's good to see everybody in the chat, such as James and Mr. Exhausty. Hello. Hello, everyone. So let's go ahead and get started by just talking a little bit about the research that we've been working on this week. So Alex, I know you've been pretty busy with the Wi-Fi Nugget, and there's a couple things, if you already have an S2 Wi-Fi Nugget, that are kind of good news.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of development work, both in propping up new documentation pages and also improving the current design for the Wi-Fi Nugget. So I actually don't have it pulled up, but I think
if you switch over to my screen.
Cool. That's great. Yeah, so we released the first version of the Rubber Nugget binary earlier this week. So that includes the new web interface that allows you to edit and deploy payloads from a browser on your phone, laptop, or basically any other Wi-Fi device, as well as a built-in interface that runs on the screen of the Wi-Fi Nugget. If you want to switch over to the main repo, I think they can get a peek at what that looks like.
Yeah.
Including some really cool custom cat graphics.
Created by our primary Nugget artist, Alex, here as well.
Yeah, which is actually reactive. So like when you're running payloads, it gives you reactive feedback on the types of commands that are running. So having this live feedback is really awesome because you can also use this for debugging or also just for, therapy. If you want to look at some cute cats, you can do that. Yeah, so we released the first version of this binary. So if you have an S2 Nugget, you can just go ahead and check out that repository, download the latest bin file, and there's instructions on how you can flash that over to your Nugget.
Yep, all the instructions are right here. It's only 7 steps to get set up with the new Arduino firmware, which is also way faster than the CircuitPython. It takes the CircuitPython stuff like a good 3 seconds to start up all the way, and sometimes it crashes once in the beginning. This Arduino firmware, you plug it in and instantly get started. And 36 payloads in 3 button presses or less. That's really cool.
Yeah, and then in addition to that, we've also been working on a new improved rugged case for the Nugget. So this one is a snap fit design. We noticed that one of the potential flaws some of our older case designs had is just the top faceplate would loosen over time, potentially causing damage to the screen, buttons, or other stuff like that if it's just floating around in your backpack and the faceplate happens to fall off, which we noticed some of our customers had feedback on. So we're working on improving the design by adding something a little more robust. So this snap fit design hopefully allows it to stay in place a little better. And we'll be dropping the files for that soon if you want to print your own or pick one up on our web store.
Yeah, so if you've got an S2 Wi-Fi Nugget, today is a great day. You can update the firmware, and you can also print yourself a new case if you have access to a 3D printer. But we've been working really hard on making sure that these Nuggets are more durable, they're better at what they do, and I think this case in particular is going to prevent some broken screens on Nuggets, because that's really the number one way that they tend to go.
Yeah. Also, just a quick question. Someone asks, what's the difference between a D1 Nugget and an S1 Nugget? It's actually the S2. Get fooled. So the S2 Nugget primarily is used for USB attacks. That's because the built-in chip has native USB, which is a function that lets it act as a USB host. So basically it can mount itself as a flash drive, or it can also emulate things like a USB keyboard to do keystroke injection attacks, mouse jiggling, and stuff like that. And the D1 Nugget, which has supported firmware for an older version of the ESP IDF, allows you to do Wi-Fi based attacks, which unfortunately the S2 cannot do at the moment. So the main split we have here is one of them is better for Wi-Fi hacking and the other one is better at doing USB attacks.
Yeah, so the S2 Nugget also uses the ESP32S2 for everyone who likes these cool little hacking microcontrollers, which is an awesome new board that allows you to do so much more stuff than you were previously able to do. So that's why we really like it, because it has native USB built in, and it's great for those USB attacks, whereas the D1 Nugget uses the ESP8266, and it's much more similar to something like the stuff like Spacetune's Wi-Fi deauthor, for example, runs on the same type of chip. So really good question. All right, so I think it's about time that we get into the news today, unless, oh wait, There is some more news. If you have a Hack 5 product called the Wi-Fi Pineapple, which you might have heard of. Oh, look, we happen to have one
How
right here.
convenient. It also has a thing on it.
Yeah. So this is a Wi-Fi Pineapple. If you haven't heard of what it is a Wi-Fi attack platform by Hack5, and it was recently updated with some firmware updates that allow all sorts of awesome stuff, including 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi hacking and some other really cool things. And Alex just put out an episode on Hack5 talking about some really cool stuff. So if we go over to his screen.
Yeah, so I covered how to use one of the main modules on the Wi-Fi Pineapple interface, which is PineAP, to create rogue Wi-Fi networks and also to run karma attacks, which I think are really cool. These are essentially just attacks that trick your phone into connecting to an access point since it looks like a network it's connected to before. So if you want to learn more about how these attacks work and also how you can use the Wi-Fi Pineapple to do that, you can check this video out.
Yeah. No, I really, really like these karma attacks because you basically set up in a new area where you don't know anything about the Wi-Fi devices around you. You listen with the Wi-Fi Pineapple to hear the nearby devices calling out for networks they've connected to in the past, and then the Pineapple just creates a fake version of that network that looks just like the client device is expecting. And if it is a Wi-Fi network that doesn't have a password, the client will actually just immediately connect back to the Pineapple, and boom, you have a man in the middle position, and you can start doing all sorts of hacking stuff. So if your phone currently has a bunch of open Wi-Fi networks stored inside of it as trusted networks, you should probably go through and delete those, because the Wi-Fi Pineapple is going to use the technique that Alex shows to grab all of those and potentially own your phone's data connection and do all sorts of sneaky things.
Yep. Scary stuff.
Yeah, so check out the link on the Hack5 channel if you haven't seen it already. It's been up for a day and it's already got, what, like 5,000 views? Hey, that's pretty good actually. So nice. Yeah, keep those views going. And if you want to see more Wi-Fi Pineapple related stuff, please let us know. It's been, it's been quite a week for the Wi-Fi Pineapple. I think we did the live stream on it. We also had Glitch come out with an LTE hack for the Wi-Fi Pineapple, and then we went through and had Alex do a video on how to use the karma attack feature. So all in all, a good time to have a pineapple.
Yeah, stay posted for more pineapple content.
Yeah, well, a good time to have a pineapple, except for you, because you're allergic.
Yeah. And kiwis, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Well, the Wi-Fi kiwi is still a long ways off, so you're safe for now.
Hey, there is the Wi-Fi coconut, which is possibly coming out, maybe someday.
And maybe
I'm also allergic to that too. Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead and start to get into the news for the week. So one of the more ironic stories coming out of the Ukraine-Russia conflict is the looting of tractor equipment. Now, we've covered how farmers in the United States have been reverse engineering or hacking their tractors to be able to use them and repair them outside of the sometimes very expensive warranty programs that are provided by companies like John Deere. But in this case, it looks as though Russian troops actually took a tractor from Ukraine and brought it, or rather allowed it to be brought back to Chechnya. So these tractors ended up somewhere near Grozny, and while the people who initially looted them might have been excited to suddenly get access to all this great agricultural equipment, they would be disappointed to learn that they are now remotely disabled. So the problem with the problem that a lot of farmers were having with these systems is they are owned and operated by the companies that sell them, and because there's this kind of element of ownership that goes beyond the initial sale, the company can flip the switch and disable the equipment if they want to. And in this case, as soon as they learned that their customers that had these tractors stolen, they reacted the same way that a car dealership would, that had a kill switch and just turned it off. So unfortunately, while this seems like a kind of open and shut ironic case, there has been tractor jailbreakers out there for a long time. So this is not a new problem with people dealing with lockdown tractors who want to fix them up or get them working again. So it seems as though some of the people who have looted this equipment have managed to link up with, I guess they're calling them consultants in Russia who specialize in jailbreaking or breaking into the firmware of tractors and unlocking them down so they can be used again. So it looks as though these tractors may eventually end up being able to be used, but initially they are not proving to be as valuable as the people who looted them thought they would be. So another reminder of how tractors and all sorts of other agricultural equipment are now much more connected than they were before. And even though you've taken something thousands of miles away from where it was supposed to be, it doesn't mean that it can't be remotely locked by the vendor who sold it. So yeah, whoops.
This is an interesting case where I actually support it being able to be remotely locked down, kind of.
Yeah, because originally these were also mostly stolen from dealerships. So, the dealer probably had some stuff on it to make sure if someone did, steal them, that there was some way of being recovered. But since there's no way these tractors are going to be recovered, the next best thing is just locking them down so that it's not useful to steal these anymore. I mean, the concept here, of course, is like if you steal a tractor and it gets locked down, you're not going to waste the fuel to haul back a bunch of tractors that are just going to get locked down when they get there. So hopefully this discourages some of the looting, especially around agricultural equipment, because right now there's a lot of concern around the food shortage that could result from the war in Ukraine.
Gosh, I actually just closed out a piece of news, but dang. Apparently, also the agriculture industry like here is under attack too. Just various whatchamacallits. There's like malware and ransomware and stuff like that targeting U.S.
Oh,
well, that's
you mean
one of them.
This news story.
Yeah, I saw that, and then also another piece. But
yeah, so
if you want to read that one.
So critical infrastructure, agricultural infrastructure, of course, being included among that, is increasingly being a target for ransomware attacks. And the reason is, there's very little say in whether or not people need to eat food. That is, the answer is yes. So if you hit an industry that is agriculturally sensitive, not only do you immediately get the attention of the US government, you also generally get paid pretty quickly. At least it seems with some of these ransomware gangs. So, of course, the problem here is if you attack the US agricultural industry, then you run the risk of disrupting the food supply. And you can imagine that of all the ransomware gangs out there, the US government is probably going to spend a considerable amount of their time disrupting whatever it is you have going on if you start messing with the food supply. And in this case, it looks as though Agco, which is a brand that owns a bunch of other brands, which might be more familiar. Where are they? They're somewhere down here.
I think
Fendit, Massey Ferguson, Challenger, Gleaner, and Valtra.
Sound like Pokemon.
Yeah, they do sound like Pokemon. But apparently they are also major players in the agricultural industry. So the fact that their parent company has been hit with a ransomware attack could potentially impact the distribution of the farming machines and other things that we rely on in order to get food to the table. So yeah, it's not very common nowadays to see ransomware gangs going out of their way to attack the agricultural industry based on how hard previous actors have been hit for touching these industries. If you mess with US oil, food, or water, and arguably electricity as well, then you're probably going to get in a bunch of trouble and have lots of bad things happen to you. Where if you're out there hitting like smaller organizations that don't really have as big of a part in the critical supply industry, eventually you're going to get punished, but you're not going to get the full weight of the US government thrown against you. So oftentimes when these attacks happen, it's because there's a market of ransomware people who will go out and buy a ransomware product, like something that's already been made by someone who's better at programming than them. They will take this product, they will use a scanner to find vulnerable systems, and then they'll fire off an attack and see if it sticks. And if it does, then hooray, they might make some money. But if not, then they go and try again. These are not sophisticated people that are usually going after an individual company. They're often people that are using a product they barely understand to go after whatever computer is vulnerable. And if they happen to hit something really big, it kind of reminds me of the time where in San Francisco the entire BART system was shut down because a ransomware affiliate was basically using a product, accidentally hit a major transit system, got scared, and walked away. He's like, I'm not dealing with this. I did not expect this. But as a result, nobody was there to give them the password to get their data back. So these sorts of attacks where somebody is hoping to get like a low-level or mid-level company and instead they hit someone really critical and then they panic, it's kind of increasingly common as people who are not very familiar with what this ransomware does or how it works are using it to try to make a buck wherever they can.
It's kind of scary that like just with enough money you can purchase like tools and like toolkits that can do this for you without even understanding how they work.
Yeah.
Like basically amateurs can hack stuff like this. And also on the scale of like industrial stuff, we were talking about a toolkit that came out, which I think was Pipe Dream, right?
Yeah, Pipe
that was
Dream.
like targeting various industrial control systems and stuff like that, which apparently just gives people access with money to a toolkit that can be used to attack various critical infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's crazy how the skill level has really gone down for these sorts of attacks. This could be, a very targeted spear phishing attack going after this business in particular, or frankly, they could have just had a vulnerable connected computer and a ransomware affiliate could have downloaded, something they paid for, ran it, and then ended up attacking this business without even individually targeting them. They were just happened to be vulnerable to this thing that they bought. So yeah, it happens increasingly. Again, we don't really know in this case. We just know that this could potentially impact the food supply if some of these sub-brands are impacted.
Yeah, great way to bring attention to you when you attack industrial sectors.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so just some more Russia-Ukrainian news. So pro-Ukrainian hackers are using Docker images to DDoS Russian sites. So I thought this was really interesting. So various activists, or rather hacktivists, that are on the Ukrainian side are targeting vulnerable Docker images on the internet. So basically, any servers that are deploying Docker images are being targeted, and they'll basically take over these Docker endpoints to deploy their own image, which you can see here. They're using the following images: Stop Propaganda and also Stop Russia. So basically these images are just DDoS tools that will fire requests over to various websites that they have saved in this word list here, targeting the Russian Kremlin. You can see they're also going after some other websites like the ach.gov.ru, which is probably like some sort of payment portal, and some other various Russian sites. So I thought this was a really interesting attack vector. So they're basically just taking over existing Docker deployments and then using it to run their own. And then as you can see here, CrowdStrike has provided the following snort rule, which is an IDS tool, an open source one that you can download. So if you have any Docker images deployed on whatever web servers you have, you can use this rule to detect for intrusion, and also specifically for these images that are being used to stop Russian propaganda, as it's purported.
Yeah, so this is really interesting because I think it was last week we were talking about how there was a huge denial of service attack that Cloudflare stopped. And when they did the analysis on it, like typically when we see like these big denial of service attacks, it's IoT devices. It's like printers and like web gateway devices and like all sorts of other infrastructure that is being used to attack. As in this last attack, they noticed it was data centers. And they're like, why are data centers primarily being used to do these attacks? And it was exactly because of stuff like this. Docker images that are vulnerable, that are being run on a commercial data server like AWS or something like that, that get compromised and used to send tons and tons of data to a specific website in a way that causes it to degrade, shut down, or have problems in a denial of service attack. So yeah, we're increasingly seeing some of these Docker images being used to amplify these attacks. And instead of relying on vulnerable IoT systems, we're instead seeing this trend of data centers being used as the focal point of these huge denial of service attacks. And again, it's Docker images and things like that that are responsible for a lot of it.
Yeah, with access to a lot of computing power online and distributed like web servers that you can just pay for access to, like AWS or various other online VPS services. That's becoming an increasing thing that's being used as the middleman in some of these attacks. When you don't have your own computing power, you can just take over some vulnerable images or web servers or other services like that that have the firepower that you need.
And also somebody in the chat mentions that they'd heard a story of ransomware being deployed against a hospital, and then the hospital being like, we're a hospital, like, why are you doing this? And the ransomware actors being like, our bad, we didn't know. And just giving them the keys and exiting gracefully.
Nice.
So yeah, it does happen, as we mentioned before, that sometimes ransomware actors get in over their heads.
Yeah, so another example I have, if we want to switch over to my screen real quick. So did you know that Google's SMTP relay service is vulnerable to, or rather, Google SMTP relay service was abused for sending phishing emails due to a vulnerability where basically anyone that's using the service can emulate anyone that is a Google tenant can spoof emails as another Google tenant and use this in order to send out phishing emails or stuff like that. So basically, Google offers an SMTP relay service. So these are usually used when companies don't want to prop up their own infrastructure for sending out like bulk emails and having to manage their own mail server. You can just use sort of a middleman like Google's relay service in order to send out these emails for you. But companies that are using this relay service, if they don't have the proper domain-based message authentication and reporting conformance policy implemented on their DNS servers, if they're also using this SMTP relay service in order to manage the emails that they're sending out, you can basically just spoof emails as their domain. And apparently there's some pretty high profile ones that don't have this policy set up just out of complacency, including Trello, and there's a whole list of them. Oh, Dell.com, Wikipedia, Yandex, this one that I probably can't read out loud, Bitly, and Live.com that don't have these DMARC policies set up. So it makes it really easy for an attacker to basically just send out emails that look to be authenticated from these domains and just basically pass through to your inbox, completely
Someone also
bypassing
says
the spam
this
filter.
screen's too small to read. So
Oh.
make sure to enlarge it when we're screen sharing.
Yeah, so I thought this was fairly interesting, and Google says they're trying to tackle this issue, but also various other SMTP relay services may also be potentially vulnerable to this. Yeah, so as a mitigation for this, something that you should set up is properly configuring your DMARC policy. So if someone is trying to spoof your domain, it will instead reject these spoofed emails when clients receive them. Another thing you can also do is probably check the headers on the emails that you receive, because it's actually fairly simple to spoof emails. So just by checking like the raw source code, you can actually check the domain that it's coming from.
All right, so over on my screen, this is not a problem or even really that much news. I just really like to highlight different tools that are useful, especially for hackers to do all sorts of interesting things. One that came up that I thought was really interesting was the ability to embed Python scripts directly in HTML. And there were some ways to previously do this that required you to change the Python script a bit in order to get it working. And in this case, you can literally just paste into a HTML document, provided that you have the right tag. So the way that it works, there's an example here, is you can write a very, very simple Python script, paste it in this PyScript area, and then have it execute in a very clean way. And this also gives you the ability to accept a variable or something in your Python script within HTML and then have it process it and return a result, which honestly I think is super cool. And I haven't really used Python scripts with the intention of them being embedded in a website before, but the thought that I could just do that now and it will execute and work properly is really, really cool. So if you're a Python person and you've been wanting to make a little Python application for a web domain or something like that, or stand up a little web interface, this is something you can do to process Python code directly in the website and then have the result be there as well. I don't know, I thought this was really interesting. It's cute and it improves upon some previous efforts to make this possible. So if you're interested in Python and HTML, check this out. It was debuted at PyCon, which I really wanted to go to because it's not even that far away. It was just in Salt Lake City, I think last weekend. But I think so far this is my favorite thing I saw come out of PyCon. So very cool and very interesting for Python people.
Yeah, that's really cool. Python, I've seen Python used, of course, for backend processing, but front end is a whole new thing. And I've always wondered if it would ever come around to that, because of course we have interpreted languages in the browser like JavaScript. And I wonder what this is built off of. I wonder if it's a wrapper for JavaScript.
It is a wrapper. Yeah,
oh, cool.
It is a wrapper.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
Yeah. So
I love how one of the comments at the bottom just says, "Good Lord," just when you thought the internet couldn't get any worse.
That is really funny. Whatever. I think this is cool, especially for people who don't know a lot about front end stuff, and instead, oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Don't know a lot about front end stuff and want to try some of their Python skills. So,
yeah.
I thought that's interesting.
It's really cool seeing the new paradigm or pattern for ways that applications are being developed. Everything is web app based now, and it's just becoming easier and easier to develop these things. You don't even have to write static HTML sites anymore. For example, the documentation site we're working on uses a really cool thing called a static site generator, which I've been using to put up documentation for the Nugget and stuff like that. And it's just really easy to write this sort of stuff now. So it's cool to see Python in there.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it just kind of lowers the barrier for people who might be really good at Python, but not so great at back-end web stuff,
Yeah.
All right, so over on my screen, we have an interesting story of the U.S. Department of Defense getting phished, and getting phished in a way that they presumably had a lot of defenses against, yet still managed to go through to the point that this check cleared and the phishing actor got paid. They also got arrested, so this is not a good idea, and there was a lot of I think just magical thinking in the way that this threat actor was behaving. So all right, let's go through the story really quickly. So, U.S. Department of Justice announced a conviction of, I'm not going to pronounce his name, a 40-year-old guy resident in California for multiple counts related to a phishing operation. So how did this go down? Well, first they went ahead and just bought a domain that looked kind of similar to a legitimate military URL. So dla.mil is something that is used by like military vendors to get themselves paid for big contracts, and in this case specifically related to like aviation fuel. So the United States military has bases all over the world, and they have to fuel up their airplanes, and they pay for this like jet fuel via third-party companies that supply it to them, and this is all managed in this portal. So they were like, that's a nice domain. Let's just go and get diamil.com. Now, obviously, there's some issues here. First, there's a dash. So if you're just like looking at this, you're just like, there's no dash here. And then there's also a .com. So clearly, these are not the same domains. But to some people, and in this case, it was the actual vendors who were supplying, whatever services to the U.S. military, it looked close enough. So as soon as these people were the recipients of this phishing email that had this link in it, they would go to a cloned login.gov website. So the cloned login.gov website allows them a place to put in their credentials, and then we'll forward them to the real website as soon as they do. So, all right, like so far, this is a pretty good attack. Like they've managed to hit just the vendors. There's not a lot of really good detection for this, and the vendors might be logging in from various places. So they managed to get the credentials of some of these government vendors, and then they log into the portal as these vendors and start going through all of the active fuel provision contracts. So there were apparently 11 of them, and it was a $23 million contract paying for provision of 10 million gallons of jet fuel to the Department of Defense. So, all right, that is a lot of money. And it seems as though these sorts of contracts should have some sort of like automatic protection to make sure they don't go to the wrong person or get stolen. And that is exactly what they have. So the Department of Defense's servers have a security system that scans the database every 24 hours for bank account changes and blocks payments of outstanding invoices that meet specific risk criteria. That sounds great, right? So like we're open and shut, we're done. Well, not exactly. So the conspirators found this problem and managed to resort to just calling them, the Defense Logistics Agency, and just be like, hey guys, so sorry, I'm having such a bad day. Can you guys just change this over? I'm sorry, I know I was supposed to, click some buttons or whatever, I forgot to. Can you just switch this over? And they delivered false explanations and requested manual approval of the financial information. So we've now gone from phishing to just straight up social engineering. So they made phone calls to the actual military and said, hey, we saw that your security system flagged this change. Can you unflag it, please?
It's pretty bold.
It's extremely bold. So this is where I feel like once your scam is detected and you resort to calling them and having like a phone conversation with someone, you're in hot. Like you better be doing this for like a nation state or something that's going to protect you, because at that point when you're talking to someone on the phone, like your little scam has been detected and you're just trying to get it undetected. So I would, if I was the cyber criminal, that's where I would walk away, but they decided to continue. So they managed to rope in the owner of a car dealership, and they managed to somehow have the invoices of the car dealership like cover the amount of money that they were sending over, that they got manually approved. And once they did that, they managed to send over and then get this check cleared, which to me is pretty incredible. So obviously once this did clear, the car dealership was not a registered government vendor, and they hadn't gone through all the processes necessary to do so. So even though the payment did clear, it immediately got flagged. So they weren't registered on the system, and they also weren't a government contractor. So that, plus the mismatch of the bank account, ended up flagging and causing an investigation, which then uncovered the entire scheme. So, these threat actors basically knew that there was a scanning system in place that had already flagged their scam, And rather than walking away or figuring out some other way of doing it, they decided to just call the government and just hope that that was the only system in place to check whether or not the money was going to the right people. Now, this is kind of a good story in that even though it's embarrassing for the US government, they did catch this transaction and their systems did work the way they were intended to, if a little bit late. But it also goes to show that some of these threat actors are fairly sophisticated, they're pretty skilled, and they are not good at making risk assessments. Because in this case,
too persistent.
Yeah, this was perhaps too persistent of a threat. This threat was persistent to himself. And in the end, the fact that he was willing to do all this incredibly bold stuff to rip off the US government ended up just getting them a potential 30-year prison sentence and a maximum fine of $1 million, or twice the gross profit loss resulting from the offenses.
I have to respect that hustle, though.
This
all
was,
or nothing.
This was an all or nothing hustle. Yeah, so, I mean, really, again, like, good to have defenses in place that look for obvious mistakes here, because if this guy was a little sneakier, then he might have been able to, you know, get somebody enrolled in the system and then find out a way to, like, move the money. But it just seems like they got kind of impatient, and then they ended up getting caught by the automatic controls put in place to prevent this sort of situation. So what does that go to show? Well, I mean, it might not have caught the problem as early as we would have liked, but having multiple layered defenses is super critical to having problems like this get stopped early on. Now, of course, like, this threat actor could have gone a different way, and they could have instead used their access to try to deploy ransomware among the US government vendors and then try to make their money from them. And that honestly might have been a little bit harder to track. Not giving suggestions here. I'm just saying from what I've seen, this sort of like phishing attack that also involves like a personal phone call to the US military is pretty unusual because of how likely it is you will get caught. Again, unless you're like a government actor and you can just go back to some third-party country and just be like, oh, I didn't do anything. So if you're not going to get extradited for this, then I guess it's a good idea. But if you live in the United States, then this was pretty dumb.
Yeah, dumb to say the least.
This is probably my favorite cybercrime story of the week, though, because just the sheer audacity and the level of technical skill necessary to pull this off was pretty impressive for someone who like clearly had no idea that they were in over their head.
Yeah, he got his foot in the door initially with, I guess, typo squatting, which is
yeah,
impressive.
the fact that it's it's
sort
not
of
even
typo
typo spotting.
squatting.
It's more just like phishing with like a semi-convincing URL. But this is literally like something that people use DNS twist to get started with. Like this guy just had DNS twist and then some knowledge of how to clone websites. It really doesn't take that much skill.
Yeah.
All right, over to you.
Yeah, sure.
Make that font bigger, friend. You got a whole screen there.
Someone says it's hard to see the actual resolution on Restream. I hope you guys can see this. If not, you'll have to listen to my voice. Cool, so just some more chaos brewing in open source stuff. So this is some news about NPM, which we've talked about quite a handful, but one of the pieces of news we covered last week regarding NPM was a flaw where basically any developer that's uploading packages to NPM can arbitrarily add other developers to their package. So that means they can make it appear reputable just by adding like Facebook developers, the actual developers of NPM themselves, and just making it seem like a credible source for a package you might want to download for your JavaScript package or dependency. And then they can also go ahead and just leave the repository, but then upload malware to it and stuff like that. So people might be enticed into cloning these NPM packages. So a patch has been published for this, and you can't just arbitrarily add developers anymore to this platform, which is great. But in addition, there's a new research project that's put out by the Open Source Security Foundation called the Package Analysis Project, which is attempting to tackle two common issues, typo squatting and also, what is it called? Dependency confusion. Yeah, so typo squatting is just where you basically take up a repository name or a domain name or something like that. That's really similar to a popular dependency that's already out there. Like, for example, I think one of the referenced ones was colors, which was taken down a while back. But a couple other malicious developers typo squatted the domain, or rather the NPM package colors with like an extra S or like two S's, and used it to host malicious packages. And in addition, dependency confusion is the state where if a company has an internal repository that has, if they have an internal repository or dependency with like a certain name, if you go ahead and basically just if you register a public one, like on the NPM registry with the exact same name, when you go ahead and try to update whatever tools these are, it'll go ahead and download it from the public source instead of the private one since it's proprietary. So the package analysis project is attempting to tackle this issue, and they've already discovered 200 malicious NPM packages uploaded over the course of a month. So this is great news for that, since it seems that NPM seems to be a common vector for hosting malicious software. And also, in addition to this, there's just some other stirring news in open source, like the common Sheet.js dependency, which left the NPM registry just over some internal drama and legal matters. So this is a pretty big package that is used for parsing like Excel files using plain JavaScript. And a lot of people in the open source community are kind of pissed that they just chose to take this package down. Supposedly because they're in some sort of litigation implications of various sorts, and they didn't want to front any money to actually fight back with NPM, so they just went ahead and pulled this package.
They'd also said that they, for whatever reason, did not want to implement the mandatory like 2FA.
Oh, yeah.
So the sticking point of this whole thing was that NPM was like, all right, we've been in the news too much, which we can attest to. We cover NPM like how often?
Like every week.
Like every
Yeah.
week. Yeah. So finally, like GitHub was just like, okay, you're done. Like you need to use 2FA for all of the, like if your package has more than X amount of whatevers, then you're a VIP, and VIPs need to use 2FA because if someone maliciously commits here, NPM is super vulnerable to that, so there needs to be some sort of trust. And Sheets.js was just like, no, and they're like, we're not going to do that, and now they're in some sort of litigation. But the core, I think, issue here was also that they didn't want to use the 2FA thing, and they thought that it was overreaching. And being reached out to and be like, hi, you're a top maintainer on NPM, and we need you to enable 2FA. It's going to be done manually, and it's mandatory. They did not like that. So yeah, I'm not sure if they're like protesting against the 2FA thing, or like if it was just that now that has sparked like a legal thing between them and they're just done with it. But yeah, the 2FA thing was a direct result of how many times we've literally mentioned NPM in the last like 2 months even.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some people think later on down the article, it says some Reddit users surmise that their decision might not have anything to do with that, but they think it might be because they don't want to invest a penny of the developer's time into helping a company, NPM, that they have a lawsuit going on with. So we don't really know what's going on there, but I think it's really dumb if they're just starting this over, not wanting to use, MFA or 2FA. It's ridiculous.
All right, so over on my screen, I think I have my second favorite cybercrime story of the week.
Cool.
This is a story of DeviantArt and Pixiv users being hit with NFT job offers, which already should be, a huge red flag. But these job offers were actually trying to steal all their precious coins of various types and shapes and kinds. And of course, also whatever else you have on your computer. So it would try to steal passwords, logins, anything stored, like Discord tokens, whatever. So how was this done? Well, users on these creator-friendly services are often looking for, work that might be pitched to them by people who are, let's just say, like, it makes sense. Like, often you'll get offers on these platforms and they'll be totally random or spammed out. But if you're getting one that's targeted to you that actually could be applicable for your work, a lot of these people are much more receptive to that. So the message that they were getting is, hi, we appreciate your artwork. Cyberpunk Ape Executives is inviting 2D artists, online/freelance, to collaborate in creating NFT project. Okay, we got some red flags already. As a 2D artist, you will create amazing and adorable NFT characters. Your character will become an important part of the NFT universe. Aww. Our expectations from the candidate: 1, experience as a 2D artist. 2, experience and examples of creating characters. 3, Photoshop skills. Like, who doesn't meet that on DeviantArt? You're like, okay.
What a low barrier to
Main
entry.
task: creating your characters in our NFT style. Interaction with the art team. Blah, 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 and then it says payment per day, $200 to $350 per day. We'll pay you however you want, but they won't, though. So what happens is you download this zip file that's password protected, a RAR file that's password protected from Mega, another big red flag. And then because like Mega doesn't scan anything for anything, they don't care what you upload. So it could have malware, it could have all sorts of stuff. And you can see that the result is these charming apes.
Aw,
But one of these
they look
apes
harmless.
is not the same as the other.
Oh
One
my
of them is
gosh.
evil and will infect your computer. Can you guess which one it is?
It's almost like I can pick it out right off the bat. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got to be the evil triangle ape.
Yeah, of course it is. But also the .exe
Right.
is the, and of course it's not really that well disguised. But if some of these are in all caps, some of these are lowercase, some of these, the threat actor has tried to make it so it's confusing enough that you just kind of miss the fact that this is a .exe file. So you're clicking through the apes, you're feeling pretty good. You can make an ape in this dumb style. You're like, look, this ape hasn't even friggin' moved. I could just take this, throw it in Photoshop, and just put a new outfit on it and make $300 a day. This is great. Double click, boom, infected. So what's interesting here also is this malware has a pretty good chance of not being detected by antivirus because when uploaded to VirusTotal, it doesn't hit on anything except one, which is, I mean, for a piece of malware is pretty good. So after that, it will go on and try to steal all sorts of stuff, including cryptocurrency. So if you've got some, imaginary money on your computer, this will take all of it away from you and cause many tears.
These naughty penny pinching apes are going to steal your cash. Watch out, guys.
Yeah. So apparently, also they receive some users have received this message in Japanese, which is interesting. But this specifically targets artists who are interested in like NFT/cryptocurrency. What it's trying to do is steal their cryptocurrency or NFTs. So a very interesting kind of an NFT focused attack here that is hitting unusual platforms. Like I wouldn't typically see like deviant art used as something that's going to be a malware dropping campaign. But here, that is exactly what it was used for. And because maybe some of these artists are interested in NFTs, and frankly, people are so confused about what these are, and like how they come to be or exist, or where the people behind them get their money, it's a pretty brilliant phishing attack because it capitalizes on the confusion behind these kind of like trendy things that are kind of ethereal. And it's just like, you could be the creator of these things that people will buy, and you'll make money, and we'll all make money.
How lucrative.
How lucrative, but really they're just trying to steal your funny money right off the bat. So
it's funny to see like NFTs and also cryptocurrency being a new platform for attack or distributing malware.
Yeah, and who's behind a lot of it? North Korea. Really?
What?
Yeah. So I'll get it. Actually, that's a great transition, Alex. Why don't we talk about that?
Hey.
So because North Korea has been targeting cryptocurrency so extensively, the United States government finally had to go in and start sanctioning just any of the infrastructure they were using because it was making it too difficult for the US government to figure out who was actually stealing this stuff. So, Alex, do you know what a Bitcoin tumbler is?
Yeah, it's supposed to obfuscate the addresses of Bitcoin stuff when you're attempting to do transactions, so that way it's a little bit harder, a rather large transaction, so it's harder to pinpoint who these are actually tied to. So if you're stealing a whole ton of money, it's a pretty good thing to do.
Exactly. So if you're a ransomware actor and you get paid 25 Bitcoins by some company that you breached, hooray, I've got 25 Bitcoins. Now everybody's watching these Bitcoins. How do I move these Bitcoins, which are by nature public and everybody can watch them move from place to place? How do I go and turn those into money? That is the problem that North Korea faces every time they make off with some cryptocurrency, like when they dumped a bunch of money from the Ethereum bridge not that long ago, the Ronin bridge, I think it was. But so they, Axie Infinity's Ronin bridge. So how exactly did the money get from that breach over to North Korean hackers in a way that they could use it? Well, I guess the polite term for these is now not tumblers, they're called mixers. To me, it all just sounds like bartending. So like, I don't, like, it's the same thing, like who cares? But blender.io is not in fact a bartending education website. It is in fact a website used often by cyber criminals to mix up Bitcoins that were involved in some sort of heist and then get them back in a form that they can actually use. So how does that actually work? Well, here's a nice little graphic, complete with, what is this, a whisk?
Yeah.
This is not a blender, it's a whisk. All right, fine. All right, so you take your cybercrime event, you go and do a cybercrime, you ransomware a bunch of tractors, and then John Deere pays you, or whatever. Okay, boom, we got the money. But it's in Bitcoin, so we need to launder this, because otherwise we're gonna get arrested, and nobody wants that. At least criminals don't want that. So we put this into this big box of other people's Bitcoins that includes a whisk, which is spinning at jet turbine speeds. Once all the Bitcoins had been loaded into the chamber, the whisk spins so quickly that it just rustles up these Bitcoins and makes it so that everybody who put in a Bitcoin still gets out a Bitcoin, minus a fee, of course. But they're fully whisked Bitcoin used to belong to somebody else. So now this threat actor has 25 whisked Bitcoins that came from somebody else that aren't, like tied to some sort of scam. Whereas the people who put their Bitcoins in this Blender now are maybe have 1 or 2 Bitcoins that were involved in this ransomware attack, but the majority of it is not. So for anybody who's tracking this, there's been a split where the original money that was being tracked has now been split into all these different people that have a piece of it. And then if they, again, blend their stuff, it splits it even more. And you can keep doing this until the money just kind of dissolves. And it's really difficult to tell who is actually holding the value from that transaction that is actually from the ransom. So this is the way that the sort of obfuscations work for a long time. You put in dirty Bitcoins, they get tumbled around, they get whisked around, and then boom, you get clean ones back, or at least ones that were involved in a different crime, if that's the case. So this is, the US Department of Treasury says that this is how this works. So the whisk is obviously a key component here. So again, like when these sorts of crimes happen, it's up to the threat actors to be able to get that money back into a form they can use. And these sorts of services have been essential to making sure that kind of thing can happen. Because how else do you get something that's constantly being tracked into a form you can monetize, cash out, and use to buy like nuclear weapons or whatever? So that's why like the scale of this is really important, because this is money that is literally going to fund nuclear weapons in some cases. So these sorts of funny like Ethereum like breaches and stuff that, okay, I think they're funny and nobody else thinks they're funny, so it's just a personal opinion, but these sorts of breaches actually do go and have impacts on real world stuff like the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles. So pretty serious stuff. And a lot of these companies that are now helping to clean up these funds that have been stolen are being directly targeted as part of the infrastructure being used to launder this money. So yeah, interesting. So we started out funny with DeviantArt people having their tokens stolen potentially from this like ridiculous scam, but then we ended up serious because then it's being used to make nukes.
Pretty scary stuff.
All right, over to you.
Cool. So for some oh no. Okay.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah, I hope you guys can see this big old bird here. Although the colors do look a little off. Okay, so for some Windows news, that's going to go a little bit over my head because I do not like Windows.
All right.
There's a new worm that's spreading using a pretty interesting method. So this piece of malware is being spread over USB drives, and not bad USB, just regular USB drives. So this has been called what is it? Raspberry Robin. Look at this cute little bird. He doesn't look harmless, does he?
That's also not a robin.
That's, do you know what bird this is?
That is some sort of, that's like a finch. That's a finch of some sort.
All right, so this red finch. So apparently when you plug in this USB into your computer, where it's kind of dubious how this situation would happen, it contains a LNK file, a link file for Windows that's basically just a shortcut file. So if you click on this, there's actually a way to embed things like PowerShell or whatchamacallit, CMD, command prompt commands inside of these link files, where once you click on these shortcut files, it'll go ahead and execute these. So after clicking on a link file that's stored on a flash drive, you can follow the attack flow here. You can see it opens up, oh my gosh.
Thank you.
Yes. There we go. You can see it pops open cmd.exe, which is just command prompt. It executes a malicious file stored on the infected device, and then it opens up the Microsoft installer, which is msi exec.exe. And this will usually just be a database of different applications to download and other things that are packaged within a Windows MSI. But what's really interesting about this is this will actually go ahead and connect to a C2 server, which they've determined to usually be various QNAP devices that have been compromised.
Oh my gosh. So, how does, we're not even covering QNAP this week. How do they manage to be in every single broadcast we get? All right, go on.
Yeah, so we talked about QNAP before. They offer a Soho NAS service. So it's basically just a network attached service that you can use in your home or office or whatever. And they're pretty infamous for the various vulnerabilities they disclose on their platform.
They're very transparent, we'll say that,
yeah,
about their vulnerabilities.
Which is actually kind of good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So compromised QNAP services are usually used as command and control devices to communicate with this piece of malware, which then goes ahead and downloads a malicious dynamically linked library, which is persistent on these Windows devices. And then it uses it uses this in order to just establish persistence on the devices that it was downloaded to. Although, as you can see here, the analysts who discovered this have no reason why they're doing this. This could be part of a larger thing that we usually see, which is just having a dormant botnet, which I would probably assume this might be used for. Since we don't see any info stealing or ransomware or other types of malware actually installed on the system, besides the fact that it just establishes persistence with these C2 servers. So we don't know what the heck is up with that, but be wary of these little birds.
Yeah, this whole report is crazy for birds.
Yeah.
We've got red canary, we've got the ruby rot. Like, what is going on?
Oh yeah, I didn't notice that connection, but I guess if you're a bird company,
crazy.
then you can name it whatever you want.
Yeah. So also, Zam asked a question that I would also like to know: what legit person would put their bitcoins into a Bitcoin tumbler? Can somebody please tell me what the scenario is where you would pay someone to put your legitimate bitcoins into a tumbler and then get them back out? I would love to know that. Maybe they pay you if you have legitimate bitcoins and you just get a little bit for tossing your real bitcoins in and then getting some dirty ones back. I don't know, but if you know, then please let us know, because I, for the life of me, cannot think of a scenario where I would, if I had legitimate bitcoins, put them into a tumbler.
If only our crypto expert were here.
Yeah, and also, Zam also points out that QNAP is notorious for their security problems, but possibly because they're incredibly transparent, and that makes it way easier to actually trust them. Because there's some other vendors that are just like, nah, there's no problems, and then 6 months later, everything was breached.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah.
Speaking of which, I have a quick piece of news on that. But also, before I move on from Windows stuff, there's just an interesting PowerShell thing that lets you track changes to Windows registry. So basically, one of the first things that people who are, and I don't know a whole lot on this, but people who are targeting Windows devices, one of the first things that they will go after is the Windows registry, since this just contains various values that allow them to change what processes run when you reboot. It allows you to change various user profiles and other important stuff to how the Windows operating system works. So you can see here, I don't know if you've seen this account before on Twitter, Swift on Security. They're pretty big, yeah. So they put out a tweet wanting a mode where you can detect if there's any changes to registry keys that have been edited. And someone put out a fairly simple script that you can just run in PowerShell that lets you easily detect if any values within your Windows registry has been edited, which is really useful for seeing if any of the default values have been changed by potentially malicious things that are running on your computer. I thought this was really cool and an easy way to determine something that's commonly targeted by malware.
Yeah, and there's also some great tools by Objective-C that do the same thing for Mac OS. So if you're interested in. Someone also asked, why would you want a dormant botnet? So that's a really good question. And there's two use cases I can think of. One is you want to sell it. So if you want to sell the services of a botnet, building one up first and then keeping it dormant so that nobody knows about it is a really good idea. And second is if you're going to stage a big attack and you need a C2 server that's almost impossible to take down, then having a big botnet that's able to relay commands from that C2 server as different endpoints keep getting shut down or different C2 servers keep shutting down. If you have a giant botnet that can act as a relay service for that, then provided you haven't used it before and burned it, it's going to be really, really difficult to disable your C2 server and take down your attack if you have all these different kind of intermediary devices that are going to be capable of routing that connection no matter what a defender is doing and shutting them down or blocking them. So having a big network of potential botnet devices is great if you're staging an attack and you don't want it interrupted. And it's also great if you want to have a pay for denial of service sort of business model, which a lot of people are actually doing. So, all right. So I'm going to go over to a really weird one. So over on my screen, we see just weird Google services that have flaws pretty often. This is one that isn't so much of a security concern as just really weird.
That one's ridiculous.
Up until apparently yesterday, if you type and all with the caps and then also the period after it, then it would just crash Google Docs. So this is also apparently something that would come up with a couple other repetitive phrases, I think.
I guess.
Yeah, I think there was but, and then also, therefore, and anyway, but, who, why, Besides, however,
It's a Dr. Seuss poem of some sort.
yeah, so this only works when you have show grammar suggestions enabled, and it seems like it happens when you refresh the page. So you can type all this stuff in, but then as soon as grammar suggestions is on and you refresh this, it won't work. I, however, have been unable to replicate this despite a lot of trying. So supposedly when you refresh this, it should allow, but no. No, it loads just fine. So it looks like as of today, this has been fixed, or at least I was not able to trigger it. But as you can see, it was not for lack of trying. All right, so another thing that I think is interesting to see in the news is quantum cryptography. So quantum cryptography has been theorized for a long time as being something that could be a threat to the current cryptography standards because it can be incredibly easy to crack things like passwords using a quantum computer. And the US government is now preparing for this by mandating that all agencies that use their, what is it called? NSS, let's see, national security system, to upgrade or at least identify sectors where it's necessary to upgrade to quantum resistant cryptography. So what is that? Well, they're going to get around to telling you soon because the draft for what that means is going to be available to the public in the next couple years. And that is, let's see, memo was July 2020, and as of yet, the definition of what that standard is not established. So while it has been mandated that everybody needs to go and find all the stuff that could be vulnerable, it's also has not been strictly defined yet. So good luck with that. But yes, this is definitely something that government agencies are going to see leverage against them as soon as somebody gets a quantum computer capable of doing this sort of cracking up and running. But for now, with not even a definition of what quantum resistant cryptography means, we will, I guess, have to wait until upgrading. But still, a very interesting thing to see in US government circles that they are trying to prepare for this as best they can. Probably means, I don't know, maybe they got a sweet quantum computer and they're a little worried about it now. I don't know.
Well, it's not accessible to consumers yet.
Yes, but I mean, other nation states using this sort of technology to attack like vulnerable systems is completely conceivable. So that's why the U.S. government is now making it a priority for all government agencies using the national security system to figure out what kind of cryptography they're using that could be vulnerable to this sort of attack. All right, so another interesting moment for security is Microsoft, Apple, and Google are now going to support passwordless logins. So this is using FIDO keys, which allow you to use a smartphone or something like that to allow a login without needing to submit a password. And often this will require like a biometric unlock or something to provide a second layer of security. So instead of like having a password, logging in, getting a two-factor code sent to your phone, instead there would be like a push notification that comes up that you would use like a biometric password or a PIN to log in and enable a login to whatever service you're trying to access. So if you don't have your phone with you all the time, that's going to be kind of annoying. But if you also have a bad password, it's going to mean that, suddenly, or if you're not able to remember strong passwords, maybe let's say that, suddenly it doesn't matter anymore. Because unless someone steals your device and your thumbprint, it's going to be really difficult for them to just find your password somewhere online in a data breach and log in. So this is a godsend for anybody who reuses passwords or just cannot remember passwords or doesn't use a password manager. This sort of thing is going to make it so much easier for people to log in without exposing themselves to risk or having to go through a really extensive login password. Frankly, passwords have been just kind of obsolete for quite some time when it comes to being a good method of letting you into an account, because people are just bad at their passwords. They get phished, they reuse them, they're involved in data breaches, or they make them too simple. And as a result, these sorts of FIDO logins are going to be really, really helpful in preventing the average user from having their account broken into because of an easily preventable mistake. So really cool to see, and here's an example of what this would kind of look like, but really cool that these sorts of logins are becoming more popular and allowing people to make an easy choice to get around having a password-based authentication, which frankly is not secure anymore. And that's why we have to have all these two-factor methods, is because passwords are so broken that we have to have other systems in order to kind of provide a second check to make sure they haven't been compromised. This just does away with the password completely and instead uses a second type of authentication that I think is probably a lot better than the password-based model.
Hey, speaking of passwords, I have a
Yes.
quick update to the breach that we covered the other week.
Oh, yeah, I've heard this
where-
described as a train wreck by some customers.
Yeah, where Heroku and also Travis Continuous Integration had their OAuth tokens for GitHub breached. So Travis immediately disclosed what was going on internally. They said none of their customers were affected by this breach, but Heroku seemed to be a little shifty when it came to that.
Cagey, one might say.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. So they just asked their customers all to reset their passwords without providing any other context for what was going on internally. But as it turns out, these same OAuth tokens, which were used to download internal repositories and basically just snoop around at whatever these companies had hosted on their private GitHub pages, the same OAuth tokens that were used to access this were also used to manage an internal database that contained various passwords, user logins, and credentials for Heroku customers, which is why they asked customers to reset their passwords. But reasonably, lots of their customers were pissed, and as you can see, customers call vague disclosure a train wreck.
Yes.
Yeah, because they just failed to disclose the fact that these customers were potentially on the line for this. So
Yeah, so at least it looks like the passwords were like hashed and salted, but that's still not a guarantee that they're not going to be reversed or that this database couldn't be used for further breaches.
Yeah, so to Travis, good job for disclosing what's up. To Heroku, not so great.
Could have improved. So actually a really interesting point about the FIDO logins. One person in the chat was saying, this is a problem because a password falls under Fifth Amendment rights, whereas a fingerprint can be compelled by law enforcement agencies. So if you had an account and right now you have a password on it, legally they can't compel you to give that password. However, if it's a biometric login, they absolutely can. So that is one problem when it comes to a privacy perspective. So thank you for pointing that out. That's definitely a trade-off that's being made when it comes to these sorts of things. Although you can also set up a PIN. So PIN is like a password, falls under privacy rights as well. So it doesn't always need to be biometric. And in fact, I really don't like biometric as a login mechanism because how do you change your thumbprint? Like
acetone, sandpaper.
Sandpaper, yeah. So aside from sandpaper, I guess, it's easy to change your password or a PIN, and it's quite hard to change your fingerprints or your face. So, whoops.
Plastic surgery.
It gets expensive, it really does get expensive.
Yeah.
All right, so we're just about out of time, but the last good piece of news I wanted to give is over on my screen, you can see the Tor project has received a speed boost with a new protocol that allows them to utilize their network better. The congestion control will significantly will result in significant performance improvements to Tor, as well as increased utilization of our network capacity. So basically using their existing network capacity to move things quicker, which is great. The problem though is a lot of the Tor endpoints or end nodes need to upgrade to this in order for it actually to be felt, as it were. So if you are using the Tor client and you're using this new protocol, but the exit node that you're connected to is not, then you will not see the speed improvement. But it is really cool because everybody has complained about Tor being extremely slow since the beginning of time. So any improvement to this process to make it faster and utilize their network better is a welcome improvement, provided it doesn't have any compromises with security.
Nice. Yeah, that looks real fast.
It does look real fast. Look at that.
Look at all that green.
Here's some
and
more
blue,
graphs.
yellow.
Everything's looking real green and yellow, which is good to see. So, all right, so not going to cover this too much because, it's just a speed bump and update. But again, you might not see this actually work if you're connected to a Tor exit node, which does not support this protocol yet. So be aware that while it is possible to upgrade to this, it does require both the client and the exit node to be upgraded. So just a little reason why that might not quite work for you yet, but it should, for most people, be able to give them a speed boost while using the Tor network. Okay, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I have a last little piece of news here.
All right, over to Alex then.
Just another IoT nightmare that's come up. So did you know that DNS, or at least DNS inside of a C library that runs on IoT devices, is vulnerable?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, so there's...
Go on.
Okay, so various IoT devices are using a popular C library that brings common C functions to these devices on a low level. And one of these functions is the ability to resolve domain names. So basically tying these to IP addresses and allowing it to properly resolve what servers they're supposed to be communicating with. So this library, I think, is called here it is, uclibc. So basically, there's a vulnerability in the way it resolves DNS servers. And as you can see here, it's just using the following static variable, and it's just incremental, this local ID ++ thing that increments it on a certain count. And also, it's resetting this variable. So all 16 bits of this DNS address aren't even properly used, but it's also set to a value that can be predetermined by an attacker. So basically, the issue here is an attacker can run DNS poisoning or DNS spoofing to get these devices to resolve to a server that they're not actually supposed to be communicating with, but rather one that's in control of the attacker due to this vulnerability. But the big problem with this is that this library is implemented in a lot of open source projects like OpenWRT, and also a specific version of it that's implemented across various IoT devices. Like, for example, I think the Starlink routers were one of them that was based off an older version of OpenWRT that was vulnerable. So yeah, this is really bad because attackers can use this to siphon over login credentials, and I see you
What is this
fidgeting
based
with this
on?
pineapple. Openwrt.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting to note. Okay. Hopefully that's been updated.
Yeah. Apparently, there is no current fix available for the flaw, but it's being tracked.
My poor precious pineapple. I can't believe.
Yeah, vendors are saying they'll hopefully have a patch available to fix this, but this is otherwise a nightmare if you own IoT devices or Starlink routers.
Yeah, well, I mean, it also means that they could potentially like update or something from an address they're not supposed to update from. Like if you're able to intercept a DNS request and redirect them to like a malicious update link, like you could potentially make one of these devices, if they don't have other security checks built in, or even if they do in some cases, download and install a malicious firmware update, which would be bad.
There's a whole lot of stuff you can do when you can mess around with DNS.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's all I have for my news, and I think that's about it.
I think that's about it. So I want to give a big shout out to everybody in the chat today. Thank you for some of the commentary on the FIDO passwords, and also still trying to figure out why somebody with legitimate Bitcoins would put them in a Bitcoin tumbler. So if you got something, feel free to drop it on the video. But aside from that, we will see you all next week for our live Q&A on Wednesday, which will also be broadcasting on the Hack5 channel. And again, we'll be live on Friday to go through the hacking news of the week. Thank you, especially Zam and James and everybody else in the chat who asked questions and kept everything running. And we will see you all next time. Have a good weekend. Bye.